Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd just like to say how exciting it is to speak to a room of change makers. It's rare to do that. Often we're trying to convert people. Here we're not, we're talking to the converted. So the pitch is a bit different. My colleague Sara and I plan to tap into that enthusiasm about micromobility in each of you and talk about the delivery space, the role of micromobility in delivery. Our plan today is to talk to you or give you a bit of an overview of a white paper we delivered in collaboration with Uber earlier this year. We'll follow that up with a relevant example from Sydney, given that we're here today. And then the plan is to be a bit interactive and get you to give us your thoughts. So we'll switch over to the Mentee app, get your phones ready. We'll switch over to Mentee, we'll get you to answer a few questions, and that way we'll understand a bit more about the industry, government, change makers, as you are, get your views as we're here today. So, it's no surprise that the demand for deliveries is on the rise. And that's for everything from food to parcels to home improvement items, anything really. The patterns may be different, more deliveries to residential areas, and with land prices increasing, businesses not wanting to keep large stock on site, which possibly means smaller parcels as well, perfect for micromobility. What we tried to do with our paper was tap into the quantum, the numbers of the scale of growth. Some numbers over here for you. The three key areas we looked at were parcel deliveries, groceries, and food. All three expected to have rampant growth over the next decade. And I'm sure this comes as no surprise to you. What does that mean? Well, more deliveries means more congestion on the curbsides, more vans, trucks, cars moving around on our streets, more noise, safety impacts. The World Economic Forum predicts that if these patterns continue, world's top 100 cities will see a 21% rise in congestion. And with that comes carbon emissions and all of the other impacts I just mentioned. Again, I'm sure no surprise to any of you here. For delivery companies, and you can give us a bit more information on this, but statistics say that the last mile is the most expensive of the delivery chain. 53% was a figure we'd come across multiple times, so that's what we've gone with. That means the challenge is not just for our cities and places, but also for businesses. So what are we proposing? Well, it's nothing new, really. Micromobility has been around different countries for as long as I can remember. I grew up in Asia. We didn't call it micromobility back then, but we've seen this. It works, it happens. So what we're saying is micromobility is the right size tool in the right locations. And what happens when you embrace it for delivery? Our report put forward or looked at 10 opportunities, and none of these will be unknown to you. Some of these specific ones I'd like to highlight are decarbonising transport. We're all keen on that. But creating better places, better outcomes for health, competitive advantage for businesses, leveraging emerging technologies. I'd highly encourage you to check out the report. I've put the QR code sneakily on some of my slides, so click on it, scan it, and go have a look at the report. I won't go through this in detail, but the opportunities are immense. Our report concluded with 5 big moves. What we did was try to put in the report 5 big moves, clear big moves, that city leaders could undertake now to not only encourage micromobility in the delivery space, but also accelerate it. In our work, we realized that there were some things that were so fundamental that we needed to get them right. And then there were some things that would help accelerate. It doesn't mean you need to do one before the other, but there are some that are fundamental, then there are some that will accelerate, and I'll go through that in a bit more detail. So the first 3 big moves are fundamental as we see them. The first one is safe moving. It has to be safe for people to move around by micromobility, and whether that's about moving people or goods, same story. We need to make it easier to pick up and deliver goods, whether that's within buildings, outside buildings, on the curbside. That needs to be the easy part. Policy leadership. This one goes without saying. We need policy leadership there to enable an environment within which industry can flourish. Operators can operate without any problems, without being discouraged to innovate. The policy leadership space is extremely important, and so we'll talk about that a bit more in detail with an example that Sara will go through. Acceleration moves, and this was an interesting one because they could be fundamental as well, but we thought you've really got to think about getting the fundamentals right and then speed it up. And how you speed it up is by enabling the remoding of products or parcels from bigger modes into smaller modes. How you might do that is through micro-logistics hubs. Not new, London's doing this, other cities around the world are also doing this. We've got one in Sydney. If you haven't visited the Goulburn Street one, I'd encourage you to go have a look. Interesting one to see. And then test and scale. It was really interesting hearing Lucy's presentation earlier. Tactical interventions, quick and cheap, learn, grow. Our report, QR code right there, our report looked at 10 case studies. What it tried to do was look at the 5 big moves with a lens of 2 case studies each. And so they're scattered around the world. We tried to be fair. They're not all European. You'll see a good spread. And what we tried to demonstrate was, even though not a single city's got everything right, but they're all doing bits and pieces that we can learn from. So we've covered everything from Europe to Bogota to Auckland, New York. Encourage you to have a look and find me. Let's have a chat. I can tell you more about the case study, so that's the hook. What I'd like to do now is pass over to Sara to go through Sydney, given that we're here, make it a bit more real for you, and then we'll switch over to mentee. So over to you, Sara.
Hi everyone, welcome to Gadigal and Bidjigal land. It's so good to see so many familiar faces today. So now what we wanted to get onto is getting your interaction. So I'll go through this fairly quickly. Obviously we've got so Shafani was talking about these 5 big moves, and we're going to look at Sydney as a case study of where we looked at all of those moves together. So the first of those is around that safe movement. As you would have seen, whether you live in Sydney or visiting for this conference, we've been building a lot of cycleways throughout not only the Sydney CBD, but also beyond. So this photograph here is from Parramatta, where there's an absolutely wonderful boardwalk along the escarpment that leads you right into the CBD that you can see in the background there. So that's underway. There's clearly a lot more work to go, but that construction, that sort of the planning, funding and delivery of that cycleway network, whether that's as separated cycleways or we're also looking at things like 30-kilometre speed zone limits, and we've done pop-up cycleways. So there's lots of different ways to do that, but I think that's absolutely fundamental. And it's really important to keep our delivery riders safe. That's, you know, we do that for the freight industry when they're in trucks. We need to do that for the freight industry when they're on bikes. The second big move, PUDO, just hands up if you know what PUDO is. Or a few. Okay, does anyone want to call out what it stands for? And the long, when you stretch it out, pick up, drop off. Yes. So PUDO is pick up, drop off, and the idea is that, and we're seeing a lot of councils do it. This here is in Bondi Junction, but there are other locations. I just saw one in Northern Beaches yesterday. We've seen them out at Burwood. They're coming along. Basically, it's rethinking differently about the use of the curbside, and so we've traditionally had things like bus stops and taxi ranks in addition to loading zones and parking. This is another tool in that suite, which is that it's easy for people to be able to pick up and drop off from outside a shop or a cafe or restaurant. The third one is around that policy leadership. Again, I think New South Wales has been exemplary in creating guidelines. So from the movement in place framework, future transport, right through to practitioners' guides. So there's a cycleway design toolbox, there's a walking space guide. So there's now a whole lot of I guess, guidelines in place. Now we just need to implement those. So that's always a tricky step, going from what you ought to do to actual action. But I think that we've got a lot of those settings in place now. The remoting one, so Shifani mentioned the Goulburn Street Micromobility Hub. I mean, it's really an incredibly cheap intervention. It's taken out, I think, maybe 4 or 5 car parking bays in quite a shabby car park just on the fringe of the CBD, just near Central Station. And the idea is that trucks can come in and trucks and vans can deliver goods there, and they might be cut flowers, it might be fresh bread. They literally go into the bike cage there, and then couriers come and pick it up and take it to the last mile or the last kilometre. It's been in place for quite a few years now, and it's been incredibly successful. I think there's something like, off the top of my head, 30 different providers who come and go and use that. So it's a shared system. But gosh, it's incredibly cheap. And I guess what we've been looking at is that there are examples of that around the world, and where they tend to work best is where it's right on the fringe of a CBD, so it might be next to a motorway off-ramp. The truck goes there, drops it off, and off they go, and you're literally doing that last kilometre or 2 by bike. It's a much more efficient way to deliver, and they have done some studies to show that the delivery is much faster that way than by van. And then finally, the idea of testing and scaling. And again, in Sydney, as you'd know, during COVID, we did an enormous amount of testing and scaling through not only the pop-up cycleways, but also George Street. That one there is George Street, sort of partway through its transformation with a light rail. Now, if you go down there, there's seats. It's transforming over and over until it will end up being it is now a fully pedestrianised street. On top of that, things like on the middle picture there, you can see there's a lot of people out on the street. So we've been trialling closing streets to traffic and opening it to people, having these shared spaces and so on. So I guess what we're trying to say is that these things have all been done in a location like Sydney, and all of those 5 key moves are what we ultimately need to do that shift of micromobility for the last kilometre. So now we're going to go and ask you, as industry and government, about what... Oh, sorry. My apologies, I went 1 slide ahead, sorry. So I guess our key takeaways are, and it's very hard for me to read this one, it does depend on, the success depends on both private and public sector working together to get all those 5 big moves together. To obviously check out our report, which has been on that QR code, and then you can contact Shifani and I if you've got any questions. We know that this is a new area for a lot of people. We've got examples from all around the world. We have a lot of experience in writing bike planning policy and walking strategies. We also have planners, so if you're wanting to look at how you incorporate it as a council into your development controls, we've seen that successfully done. And feasibility studies, business cases, cycleway infrastructure planning, the data story. So we've got a lot of, we've got some really good data analysis people in our teams, and obviously when councils are applying for funding grants. So there are all different ways that we can try and help you if you're interested. Now we're going to hear from you. So we're going to run mentee meter. It'll come up on the next.
Just next slide.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to press the button.
One more.
There you go.
There we go.
So you can scan the QR code. It's nice and big on the screens. Or if that doesn't work, you can type in menteemeter.com into your browser.
The first question should already be on your screens there. You can't see it, so there you go, Sarah.
Okay. Oh, that's all right. Oh. Yeah. So has anyone not been able to get onto the mentee meter? Can you put your hand up if you haven't been able to get on? Yep, great. So you'll see that there's a question up there, which is, what could government do? So we're not asking about what industry could do. What could government do to enable and accelerate the transition to deliveries by micromobility? And what we're showing, we're not able to show live what's showing up on this. Oh, we can. Oh, excellent. Okay. So we're starting to see some words coming in there. Protected bike lanes, closed roads, money, that's always a good one. Build hubs. So there's more showing on here, so it's just taking a little while to upload.
You might have to refresh it, Fabian.
There we go.
Nice.
Cycleways, protected bike lanes. Now, it'll keep asking you for more ideas, but if you don't want to enter any more, you don't have to. If you want to keep going, you can. Protecting areas, infrastructure, subsidising micro hubs, lower speed limits. Great. So after we've done this mentee meeting, we'll come and ask you to explain in more detail what you mean by some of these. So shall we move to the next question?
Yes. So the next one's to you, industry. What could industry do to enable and accelerate the transition towards deliveries by micromobility? So this is your time to shine. You might have to refresh it again.
Yeah, if it's not showing up, just press refresh on your screen. Anyone having issues with accessing that one? Right, good, perfect. Lobby, sell bikes. What else have we got coming up
Thought
there?
leadership. I can tell you what they are until we wait for them to show up. Engage in advocacy, lobby governments, adapt bikes, enable infrastructure, promotional activities, share data and resources. Thought leadership, I've said that before. Influence government. All of that good stuff's coming through. You'll be able to see these results on your screens as well if this doesn't update in time. Pitch ideas to grow. Good one. All right. What we'll do is move on to our last question, which is around advocacy and community organisations. So what can advocacy and community organisations do?
While everyone's doing that, I'm going to just make a little spruik for Better Streets. So at lunchtime, just pop down to the Better Streets booth down at the Expo. It's in the one of the far corners next to Bicycle New South Wales. That's an advocacy group that's just starting up, wanting to get better street outcomes in New South Wales, although also will scale up and into other states. So just giving a bit of a spruik for that for our advocacy organisations while we're here.
Right, some of the results. Lead by example, are you doing that, Sarah? Rider education, meet with politicians, tactical urbanism, fight for change, partner, get serious, I love that one, that is good. Drive community demand. Keen to think about how that would be done. Maybe we should go into getting people to speak about their points.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you for your contributions.
Thanks, everyone. So now we're going to come to look at a bit more in detail at the sort of answers we got. One of them that struck me, I think it was the industry one. Somebody said change packaging. Would anyone like to volunteer where you suggested change packaging for industry? I'm really curious to unpack that one. Narelle? The microphone's coming around, Narelle.
We've been doing some work on changing patterns in urban freight for the federal government. And one of the things when we're talking to stakeholders, it's, the shape of packages and, making them so that they actually are more suitable for actually fitting into, into the sorts of spaces that might be available for actually delivery by micromobility. So actually, some of that issue and how can you actually go to that sort of disaggregation of the packages and things like that? It's a very sort of practical sort of issues to pack the most into the space.
Yeah, certainly one of the things we saw happening in Europe in particular is, say, a company like DHL, where they'll as they're shipping the products, or the goods and products, they'll pre-package it into a cargo bike size container. So it goes onto the ship or the truck, and then it literally stays in that same box and then slides onto the back of the cargo bike. So in terms of that form of packaging, it's pre-thinking where the end destination is going to be, but then you're not having to unpack boxes and repack them, and so it is literally ready to go from door to door, from the deliverer through to the receiver. So that's, I think, a really good example. Yeah. Now, what else did we have?
There was one in the first question we asked which said, work closely with industry. Keen to unpack how?
How government
Works with industry.
So can we have, is anyone here from industry with an idea about how we can, go ahead then.
I think that may have been my phrase, and it was really around, instead of this being something that government does to industry, which often happens, that government really engage with industry and help make it work from the ground up rather than something that's imposed from the top down.
How would they do that?
To me, it's about genuine consultation and taking industry in as a partner as part of the project, rather than to just say, we've provided this, now come and work out how to use it.
Yeah.
Keen to hear the industry perspective as well.
I'll just wait a minute, Nilesh.
I'll just add to that, don't forget the consumer needs to also be involved.
Just a reminder too that because we've got the live stream people, we just need the microphone before you start asking questions.
Hi, Chris Harden from Ride Collar. The number one thing, Shivani, you had on your list was safe moving and regulation. I'm just curious with your white paper. I think probably the largest number of e-mobility, last mile deliveries moving around our cities are, the delivery riders. As far as I'm aware, they're all on illegal products, so overpowered, oversized, running with throttles. What did you look at as part of that research and that issue?
Yeah, we looked at New York as an example, and they're working on exactly this issue where bikes are illegal, but they're looking at changing legislation in terms of the size of the bikes that can fit on the cycling infrastructure, throttle issue, education of providers, but also talking to industry and community at the same time. So New York was a really good example. They have recently been working on a bill. You can look through it from my report, but I think that would be a good example for us to all get some inspiration from.
I could also add, Rob Chan from Zumo is here today, and I think also if you're downstairs in the expo, you'll see that in fact industry is starting to, or has been for quite some time, but is providing products that actually are legal and accessible to delivery riders. So there are models that are coming up to address that. I think governments can do a certain amount. They've got regulations and so on, but at the end of the day, it has to be that there's affordable, accessible, legal products available for people. Yeah.
Very true. Thanks for that, Sarah. How are we doing with time?
We've got a couple more minutes for questions, and it looks like we've seamlessly moved into our Q&A session. So has anyone else got questions that they would like to ask? Or alternatively, does Sara and Shivani have any questions left that you wanted to ask?
We'll give the audience a second.
I just want to, Sam Rush from Newcastle, I just want to make an observation that it's ironic that often the resistance to making it safer for delivery riders is from delivery, from the congestion caused by delivery traffic, which they jealously, want to preserve their loading zones without realizing that, of course, they'll be less needed once delivery is miniaturized.
Question down the front here.
That was a great presentation. Thank you so much. It was more an observation. You might be able to tell from my voice that I'm from the UK, and I just wanted to share with the industry that's in the room here that we are really not even near the peak of how big this landscape is going to be. In the UK, you can order things online which will be delivered to your office in London within an hour. If you go into the centre of London, the majority of traffic is either delivery traffic or commercial traffic. The online shopping landscape here is not so large, but of course it will become as large. And I think that's not a threat, that's an opportunity. But to exploit that opportunity fully, we do need to get better at kind of having these conversations and collaborating a little bit as well. That future's coming, so it's great that we're starting the engagement process.
And I think also what's interesting about that is it does trigger whole new economies, new business models. So, for example, Milk Run. Who's used Milk Run here in the audience? Yeah, so they're a model that started up where they do delivery rider. They have delivery riders. They train them. They're employees. They've got a bike. They're insured and so on. But the main thing is that you can order a small amount of groceries, and they'll guarantee to drop them off within 10 minutes. So there are these incredible models out there and incredible innovation, and that's, I guess, what we're seeing starting to come out. In London, as you said, you can move house by bike if you want to. So that's, I think, where that real innovation around, well, this is the vision that we want to have. These are all these different, the industry has incredible solutions. It's how we enable that one. Ben, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks. I might be a bit of an antagonist here, but is that where we're going? Is that where we want to be? Do we want people to be able to order stuff with an hour's notice? Milk Run is a very eastern suburbs tool. I would argue that we all probably, sorry, I'm an eastern suburbs person, so I can accept, I live within 5 minutes walk from a shop. My understanding of it is generally it's used for ice cream and chocolate. Is that actually is that where we want to go? We've got congested roads, we've got issues with last mile freight already. Is that what we're pursuing in terms of convenience, or is it more the essentials that we're aiming towards?
I think that's my favourite question this far in all of the conferences that I've presented at, because what it raises is a really important point around, well, is there even a need for this? Should we rethink our models? In terms of the 10-minute deliveries, they were fantastic during COVID, and that's where this has come from. But now that we're moving back to a normal, new normal, whatever it is, perhaps we need to rethink whether we even need this, and maybe walking to the corner store is a better option. Take your point completely, but this is a future that we want to aspire to, maybe not for the 10-minute delivery option as an option going forward.
I would argue the western suburbs is where that would be a very practical tool, a valuable one, where you don't have that density, but it's never going to work there.
I would also add, though, that I've been to other conferences recently where they're talking about drones doing exactly that job. And to be honest, I don't want a drone flying over my house dropping off someone's Panadol. You know, a heart maybe. You know, if somebody needs their heart delivered for an open heart surgery, I will gladly have it fly over my house. But if they're just dropping off a coffee and some chewing gum, honestly, I don't want that. I'd rather they be on a bike. So, and I guess if the other thing is, if that person was going to take that trip by walking, that'd be great. But the other option is they might just hop in the car and drive. And I certainly see parents dropping off kids at school who live across the road from me. We are 300 metres from the school. So I think we have to also be realistic about human behaviour. And if this is one way around people's laziness, then I'm all for it, frankly. But you're right, it does need to expand the model into other locations, and I suspect that will continue to happen.
We might just make this the last question, if that's okay, just to stay on schedule.
I mean, this may be more of a comment, but this may have already been considered, but sharing the infrastructure with use of time, you know, you've got clear ways at certain times, and, you know, who wants a delivery while they're in the office and then they have to go and pick it up? So maybe that's a collaboration exercise which can be viewed where you actually deliver where it's not peak traffic periods, you know, something on those lines.
Absolutely, won't argue with that.
Oh, I think Rachel's got the microphone. Go ahead, Rachel.
Is it on? Yep. So at the moment with development applications, the developer has to show how they're accommodating the vehicles that will come in for loading and servicing, usually at a basement level because on-street is not preferred by most councils. Do you see developers needing to now articulate how they would accommodate micromobility freight, or do you think it's more of a street, a surface level? What are your thoughts?
It's probably a bit of both. I think that it would be, essentially what would be useful for councils to do is look at where are the places where it would make sense to have a micromobility hub. And we talked about, you know, just on the fringe of the CBD, right next to your motorway off-ramp or next to a train. So somewhere where it would make sense to have that transition. You don't want the trucks to have to go right into the centre of the CBD in order to transition to a bike. So it's probably a case of on the actual development, DCP control plans, to specify which buildings should have a micromobility hub in them. I guess is probably more to the point. But you're right as well, we're finding things like apartment buildings, for example, because they're getting so many white vans and so on dropping off and delivery bikes and so on. Where do they do that? And so often there's congestion even just for one apartment building or commercial building. So yes, I think it's probably a bit of a combination of both. Thanks, everyone.